Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and welcome to Cracking Addiction. And today we have Jonathan Hunt-Glassman, who is an individual with a lived experience and also happens to be the CEO of Oar Health. Jonathan, good morning or good afternoon where you are. Many thanks for coming on to the show. I was hoping we could talk initially about your personal experience, your lived experience. Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I struggled with alcohol misuse pretty much from the day I started drinking. In high school and college, it was a pattern of binge drinking. And then in my 20s, that became a pattern of drinking to blackout. And as peers started to grow up, put that sort of excessive alcohol use in the rearview mirror for me, the opposite was happening for me. The problem was getting worse in that I was not just having one night blackouts, but multi day binges where I was continuously drunk over the course of a long weekend or a vacation. And then starting to experience the physical and mental health symptoms of alcohol withdrawal on the back end of those binges, uh, both physical and mental health. And so things were pretty rough for 15
It
years or so.
sounds it sounds pretty rough. You know, one of my favorite heroes, Gabor Mate. I don't know if you've heard him or heard of him. He always writes, or he wrote something that I find very profound. He said, "Ask not why the drug, but why the pain." And that really brings to mind, for me, it's always important to understand the why. May I ask, what was going on in your life that was driving the pattern of consumption that you've just described?
Something I've reflected upon quite a bit, as you can imagine. And I think the pain that alcohol really addressed for me was on the surface, social anxiety. So being uncomfortable in social settings, wanting to connect authentically with people, but being nervous about the vulnerability required to do so. And, to dig maybe a level deeper, I think that social anxiety was a manifestation of not feeling as secure in my most fundamental relationships as one
Yeah,
would like. And
yeah,
alcohol, for me at least, kind of fit that problem like a key in the way that
yeah,
it led not just to disinhibition, but that feeling of warmth, connection, belonging.
yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a very common problem, and it's a problem I'm concerned about. It's going to increase exponentially, especially now that we've exited COVID. And I don't know about you in America, but certainly in Australia, I believe that the ever increasing use of social media is coupled with the lockdowns has kind of put people and put young people into a situation whereby they're much more comfortable just communicating, connecting with people digitally rather than in person. And I think that social anxiety is going to be nurtured, for want of a better word, and we are going to see as a result of that, an increased prevalence in alcohol use disorders. So it's it's something that concerns me. I mean, how do you feel that's going in your neck of the woods?
Similarly, the book "The Anxious Generation" by Jonathan Haidt has been getting a lot of attention here, as I imagine it may be by you, kind of focusing on exactly these issues of the ways in which pervasive social media use and attendant lack of adventure in the real world is creating, levels of anxiety, social disconnection. I had not put that together in the way that you did with the potential for increased substance misuse, alcohol misuse in particular. But I think it especially stands to reason. I think we can all imagine that experience of someone being thrust into a college environment or another unfamiliar environment, living on their own for the first time. And, what has always been a challenging adjustment for some being even more difficult, given the trends that you were describing. So I think it's an absolutely valid concern. We know that, the pandemic years were tough years in terms of alcohol consumption. We know the consumption went up, and now we're starting to see emerging evidence that some of that consumption has turned into problematic patterns, has turned into alcohol use disorder.
So I want to commend you and thank you for your bravery in agreeing to share your story. Are you able to describe then? So you've talked about the entry into problematic drinking, which was really a way of coping with social anxiety and feelings of insecurity. But there must have been a rock bottom for you. Are you able to share that with us?
Yeah, most of us need a nudge to take action for me. And in my case, it was a physical health scare. I had had one of those multi-day binges in Las Vegas, so a bit stereotypical, but that's the story. And when I returned home, I kind of was feeling this pain in my abdomen, and exacerbated by the anxiety and other unpleasant symptoms that can come along with alcohol withdrawal. I grew very concerned that I was having some sort of acute liver issue. That turned out not to be the case. I had gone to the gym and done some ab exercises that I didn't usually do in the hotel gym, but it was enough to get me into the doctor's office. And I really credit the nurse practitioner who I saw, who said, "Yeah, we'll do some imaging on your abdomen and address this immediate concern. But I'd really like you to meet with a peer of mine, just another practitioner in her primary care practice, who had some experience treating addiction in his panel." And that push towards him and the empathy and understanding that he met me with created the conditions to make a pretty dramatic change.
That's lovely to hear. And it reflects also what I say to people, is that the first welcoming smile is the most important therapeutic intervention that anyone can provide for a client who's struggling with these issues, because they're just filled with low self-esteem, insecurity, and fear, shame, and stigma. And if you can break that barrier down so easily with a smile and a welcome, it goes. You're halfway there to helping that individual. So, can you talk to me about what it would felt like as you approached that service, that individual? How did you feel, and how did that individual help you emotionally at that first meeting?
Just as you said, I had a great deal of trepidation about that appointment, rescheduled it at least twice, putting it off. And the most important thing that this clinician did was not necessarily the medical advice or the prescription. Those were very important and very helpful. It was, in fact, the look on his face. And the most important moment in the visit was when I screwed up the courage to honestly say, as much as I feel addicted to alcohol, I am not ready to quit. Do you have anything to offer that could help me cut back a lot? And I really had no idea how he was going to react to that. But in his words, and more importantly, the expression on his face, he took that in and said, "We can work with that. I have some tools that are consistent with that. Let's get started, headed in the right direction."
We can work with that. That's a beautiful phrase, isn't it? It's a phrase full of hope.
It is.
It's not shutting the portcullis.
Indeed. And I think important, in the long run to me too, in that right from that first visit, he was signaling that I, as the patient or the person in recovery, the person who was going to do most of the work here, that I had a role in setting goals, giving input on what tools might support those goals, and bringing my own perspective, strengths, resources to this change project that we were going on together. It wasn't just doctor administering to inert patient.
Yeah, it was a therapeutic alliance, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I don't think he had, anything other than an MD, but had clearly over the years built some critical skills to the therapeutic alliance, which research as well as my own experience, indicates is so important to outcomes.
Yeah. We can work with that. I'm going to remember that. I might use that myself. We can work with that. Yeah, I love that phrase. So that was the beginning for you of a recovery journey that takes you right up to the present moment. So how, I've asked this a couple of times to a couple of peer colleagues. How do you bottle that? What's the secret? What was your journey like? First of all, what were the salient points in that journey, and then how do you bottle it? How do we give that to other people listening today?
My journey started with the prescription that was written in that visit sitting on my shelf for 2 months. It really got going once I changed my mindset a little bit from this effort is absolute make or break to a bit more of a curious mindset of I'm going to take this medication. We'll see what effects it has. And if it doesn't work out, I'm no worse off. As I kind of zoom out from that experience, I think the things that worked well for me, particularly in pursuing a goal of moderation rather than lifelong sobriety, were setting some clear goals. So my bright line was I didn't ever want to black out again because that's what I associated with all of my worst experiences with alcohol. Building a toolkit where medication was central, but where my own strategies and approaches based on experience were incorporated. So things like no more than one drink before eating something substantial, no more shots. And then lastly, incorporating, support from those around me, a supportive partner, and at times from professional behavioral health care as well. And so what I found, and I know it's true for many others, is that there isn't necessarily one silver bullet out there or one recipe that's going to work for everybody. But we can turn even the painful experiences of addiction into grist to learn what might be the right toolkit for each of us.
Yeah. I'm very interested to hear you say the word support, because I personally believe that there are no lone rangers in recovery. It's not an isolated process. You need people around you to walk with you on the journey. You might be taking the steps, but you cannot do it alone. So can we explore what that support looked like? I mean, you mentioned behavioral interventions, but let's drill down. What does that actually look like?
Yeah, so I put the support that was most helpful to me in 3 categories. One was working with a therapist to address some of the thought patterns that we started talking about that drove the social anxiety, and to reframe those and to get more comfortable both cognitively and in the way I felt in my body in those moments that had been triggers to drink excessively. 2, having a partner, and not everyone's going to have that at all times in their lives, but having a partner who supported my recovery journey and very tactically, in those moments where she saw maybe I wasn't, as in control as I was aspiring to be, could be comfortable telling me that, in a non-judgmental way and giving me that check. And then lastly, close friends. One of the things I worried about most and that I used as a rationalization to not begin my recovery journey was all of the fun and relationships that I feared I might be missing out on that alcohol had been intertwined with for so many years. And so the kind of last important source of support was friends who remained my friends. And maybe our interactions and activities shifted a bit in focus and were more likely to be, a hike at 9 a.m. than a all-night drinking session, but who, still wanted to be part of my life, even as I was making changes for the better in it.
There's a lot in there. I mean, firstly, I would reflect on the counseling, the therapy that you did, because I think it's important for people to understand any addiction is is a function really of two things. First of all, there's the positive reinforcement and there's the negative reinforcement. So the positive reinforcement is the buzz you get from the substance. So in this case, we're talking about the buzz from alcohol, and that makes you feel good. But the negative reinforcement is also there, and that's really the underlying reason for why alcohol can be a tool. So it takes away suffering. It takes away, in your case, as you've described, the social anxiety. So really, the only way to deal with it is to deal with the positive reinforcement, deal with the buzz, plus deal with the underlying driver, which is the social anxiety in your case. So that's a perfect example of why therapy was so important for your recovery, to deal with that negative reinforcement and to take away the underlying driver. The second thing as I was listening to you speak, the second thing that I comment on is this idea of social connection. So if you've identified that you change the way you've socially connected with your peers, your friends, your support group. And it reminds me of what Johann Hari says. He says that the opposite of addiction is not sobriety necessarily, but it is social connection. And so really your friends they didn't forsake you, they didn't judge you, they didn't abandon you, they kept their connection with you. And together you were able to change the way you related to one another and then establish effectively a new type of relationship that then you find rewarding and stimulating and supportive to the point that recovery was possible.
That rings very true, and I think is a brilliant synthesis of the recipe that worked for me.
Yeah. If you had to give one message of hope to anyone listening today, who's struggling with substance use disorder and alcohol use disorder, what would that message of hope be?
It's that recovery is possible. I'm one example of that, but there are millions more. And that the options to help achieve recovery may be more diverse than you've come to know. And so it pays to investigate and to assemble that toolkit of supports, professional behavioral health care, prescription medication, community, and friendship in the proportions that fit you, because you have an absolutely vital role to play in your recovery. And it is neither too late nor too early to get started. You don't have to wait for a particularly low rock bottom. But by the same token, no matter how dark and difficult things feel right now, it is possible to have a brighter tomorrow.
And in the words of that doctor, we can work with that.
Exactly.
So, Jonathan, I really want to thank you for your time today and your pearls of wisdom. And I hope we can speak again very soon. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's all for today, folks. My name is Dr. Ferghal Armstrong, and this has been Cracking Addiction.